Just some formalities before we get started. If you could turn off your microphone while you're not speaking, that would be greatly appreciated, just to reduce any background noise. If you can turn on your camera, I understand some of you will be eating your lunch, but if you can turn on your camera, it's always nice for people to see someone that they're actually speaking to. So if you do have the capacity to do that, would be great. There will be time at the end of Lloyd's talk today for you to ask any questions, and you can do that either verbally by putting up your hand and then turning on your microphone, or alternatively in the chat. So we do welcome questions, and we really look forward to you having some questions for Lloyd today. Today's session is going to be recorded, and it will be made available on the Animico YouTube site in the coming days, and you can check out our previous talks for our Lunch with Leaders series there as well if you are interested. So I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners on the land on which we meet today, which for me is the Larrakia people. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. I acknowledge the profound impacts of domestic violence on individuals, families, and the wider community in Australia. I support initiatives aimed at preventing domestic and family violence and creating a space where everyone feels safe and supported. Finally, I wish to acknowledge that we all come from different places and have different circumstances. I respect and welcome our collective differences, and I strive to create a space where all voices are heard and valued, and where everyone feels comfortable in engaging and participating. And I hope you will join me in that as well. Just before we get started and I introduce Lloyd to you, I just wanted to mention some upcoming initiatives that we have for the Northern Australian Biosecurity Strategy. On the 28th of August, which is next week, Christina Matthews will be doing a Breakfast with Leaders session, and you can find more out about that on the Animico website if you are interested. Otherwise, please feel free to reach out to me at the end of today's session. For those of you that are based in Darwin, we have the BioGlow light projection show, which will be held at the waterfront on the 30th of August from 7 o'clock till 9 p.m. The BioGlow light show will go for 4 minutes, every 15 minutes at 15-minute intervals. And so it would be great to see as many of you down there as possible to see a night of music and light show. The music competition, the Caring for Country music competition, which is run under the Northern Australian Biosecurity Strategy, is currently open for those who have a musical or dance interest. Entries are open to those in Western Australia, Queensland and the Northern Territory, and there are prizes to be won through that program. So I would encourage you to have a look into it if you are interested. The mentoring program that we have under the Northern Australian Biosecurity Strategy has recently kicked off, and we have 25 pairs of mentors and mentees this year, which is a great start to the program. And for those of you that might be interested in mentoring or having mentoring in the future, please don't hesitate to keep your eye out for that program coming up again in the future. And then finally, we also have a First Nations board intern program, which we're currently in the process of pairing our interns and our boards, and that program will begin later this month. So there's lots going on in this space at the moment, and we do welcome lots of participation from you guys as stakeholders. Okay, so now that I've given you a bit of a wrap-up of what's going on with the NABS space at the moment, I would like to introduce Lloyd Klumpp, who is our speaker at today's event. Lloyd started his career as a veterinarian in mixed agricultural practice. After 25 years in the private sector, often working to deliver government biosecurity programs, Lloyd joined the Victorian Department of Primary Industries as a veterinary officer, eventually becoming the director of the operations branch of Biosecurity Victoria. Lloyd was then the general manager of Biosecurity Tasmania, a position he held for 9 years. Biosecurity Tasmania is a division of the Tasmanian Government responsible for maintaining Tasmania's biosecurity system. In that role, Lloyd represented Tasmania on many national committees and boards, including the National Biosecurity Committee. He participated in many of the NBC's subcommittees, including as chair of the National Biosecurity Emergency Preparedness Expert Group. Since leaving Biosecurity Tasmania, Lloyd has also held positions of Chair of the National Fruit Fly Council and Chair of Tasmania's Marine Farming Planning Review Panel. Lloyd has participated and taken a leading role in many biosecurity emergency responses in both the animal and plant sectors, including Victoria's equine influenza response in 2007 and the Tasmanian Queensland fruit fly response in 2018. Lloyd has always been a strong advocate for the National Biosecurity System and is currently the Inspector General of Biosecurity, a statutory position enabled by the Biosecurity Act 2015. And one of the reasons that we're really excited to have Lloyd joining us today is that Lloyd's also going to reflect more broadly on his career, talking about leadership roles, challenges that he's faced, and all of those sorts of things that we're all interested in and that we all face ourselves in our career. So on that note, I'd really like to welcome you, Lloyd, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me here, Anne. That introduction took the first 10 or 15 minutes of my presentation. Look, I haven't prepared a formal PowerPoint presentation with leadership qualities and all the rest of it. I've sat through too many of those in my career. So what I thought I'd do instead is just simply talk to the group. And although you said there are questions at the time for questions at the end, I'm more than happy for people to interrupt and ask questions or make comments along the way, and try and make it a conversation as much as anything.
Sounds great, Lloyd. I will keep my eye on the chat for you so that if anyone puts any questions in, and I'll let you know.
Thanks. I don't profess to be an expert in any of the things I'm talking about, but I do have, as you've just outlined now, a bit of experience, and along with that experience comes a lot of what I call battle scars. And they're battle scars because they at the time they hurt a little bit, and they leave a mark on you, and that mark reminds you of that past experience, and hopefully you don't repeat those sorts of mistakes or get into those sorts of situations. So I'm going to share some of my battle scars with you along the way as well. So I might just go back and I won't repeat everything you said about my career, but I'll go through it a little bit. As Anne pointed out, I started my career 45 years ago now. I graduated in 1980 from Queensland University Veterinary School. So 45 years ago, I started in veterinary practice. And that was in the days of the BTEC program, where the lifeblood of many country practices, and I was in a small rural veterinary practice, where the lifeblood were government programs, in particular the brucellosis and tuberculosis eradication campaign. And so I started my career in that era, spending half my time just simply taking blood from cows or vaccinating them with strain 19 vaccinations. So that's where I started. And in those days, veterinary practice was, dare I say, a little primitive compared to what it is now. We worked out of some strange places. I worked in a small rural clinic in Western Victoria that had a branch clinic that operated out of a room of a company called Denny's Strawn. I don't know if it still exists. It's sort of like Elders, livestock agents. They had a little room with a table in it and a cupboard for my drugs. And that's was one of my first jobs. One day, a chap brought in a budgerigar. Remember, I've been out probably blood testing cattle all day, and it's hot and sweaty. And anyway, he brings this budgerigar in with a broken leg, and so I took hold of the budgerigar, and he left. And I thought, what I should have done is just snip the broken leg off, because budgies can survive without being one-legged. I didn't. I attempted to fix it. In any case, in my attempt to fix it, he escaped out of my hand, flew up to the roof, and then out through an open window, a skylight window, gone. I saw him flying off across the car park, disappeared forever. So nervously, I waited for the owner to come back. He wandered in, and here I am, new graduate, basically, nervously telling this guy about the escape of his budgerigar. And he looked at me and he paused and he said, "Think F. I didn't like the little B anyway," and walked out. And I just stood there gobsmacked. And one of the things, I didn't understand at the time, but I've often reflected on that event, and there are many more in those sorts of things along the way, but often reflected on that and thought, did that teach me a lesson apart from hanging on tight to the budgerigar? One of the things it taught me, or I at least not at the time I didn't realise it, but I reflected on it later, was that you shouldn't prejudge. I shouldn't prejudge what somebody might think or do, and I've made that error a few times in my career and gotten nervous and stressed about what that stakeholder might say, what the minister might say, what the secretary might say. And I come to understand that, you know what, it's not worth getting stressed about it, because more often than not, you'll be wrong in that judgment. So that's just a little anecdote of the very start of my career 45 years ago. I spent 25 years in rural veterinary practice, most of it in large animal practice, on farms, working with farmers. And it was a really important part of my life, not only because of the skills it brought me, but also it gave me a really deep understanding of the challenges that our agricultural producers and communities face. And I think that's stood me in good stead over the years. 25 years in rural veterinary practice, preg testing cows and holding up horses' legs, and it's a physically demanding job. And I got to the point where I thought, I can't do this for much longer. And so I saw an advertisement, actually it was my wife, saw an advertisement in the paper. I was living in Geelong at the time, for a role as a district veterinary officer with the Victorian Department of Primary Industries. And I thought, that sounds pretty cushy, 38-hour week, none of the hassles of dealing with disgruntled clients or holding or all that physical stuff. So I applied for the job, ended up becoming the district veterinary officer in a district in southwestern Victoria, where north of the highway it was sheep and south of the highway it was dairy cattle. And so half my time was spent dealing with ovine Johne's disease, and half my time was spent dealing with bovine Johne's disease and animal welfare stuff. I soon discovered that being a government vet is not as cushy as it sounds. In fact, being a public servant is not as cushy as most people think. And I've long been an advocate for the public service, not just biosecurity, because I think that again, perceptions need to be challenged. In any case, as Anne said before, I went on from being a district veterinary officer. I held a number of policy positions and was involved in a whole range of emergencies: bushfire, flood, anthrax. The end result being that for some reason or other, somebody thought that I must have been okay at that sort of thing, and I became one of the three incident controllers of the Victorian equine influenza outbreak. And for 7 months, the three of us rotated through the State Control Centre, managing the Victorian response to that outbreak. People often say, yeah, but Victoria didn't even have the disease. We didn't know that in the early stages. So the first 6 or 8 weeks of that response, we had horses locked up in showgrounds and racetracks, and we had surveillance being undertaken all over the place to determine whether or not we had the disease. And then for the last 6 or 7 months of that response, we focused on keeping the disease out. That experience taught me so much. And I'll use that. I'll come back right at the end of my discussion to talk about some of the lessons I've learned, starting with the equine influenza outbreak, right through to my time as the General Manager of Biosecurity Tasmania. One of the things I learned through that equine, or at least one of my battle scars, was about from equine influenza was about pressure. And I don't mean the pressure of managing the response, but I mean the pressure that gets put upon you, and that I think, sure, each of you have had this experience where you are trying to do a job to the best of your ability. You're trying to implement things that have been well planned, and you're getting pressure from external parties, sometimes from internal parties, and it's a really difficult thing to manage. The little story I'll use is about a horse called Like a Falcon. And so this is Melbourne Cup time, 2007. We've been going for some time. This horse, Like a Falcon, was the second favourite in the Melbourne Cup. Melbourne Cup was under threat because of equine influenza. And to be frank, a large part of what we were doing was trying to save the Melbourne Cup of that year, $250 million injection into the Victorian economy at the time. In any case, there was this horse, Like a Falcon, was the second favourite for the Melbourne Cup. So clearly the owners and the trainer did not want the Melbourne Cup to be shut down. And that's not where the pressure came. Pressure came because Like a Falcon resided across the border in New South Wales. And we were keeping horses out of Victoria. There were no horses allowed to cross that border, the Murray River. The executive director of the day called the Murray River that dirty brown ditch. So there were horses were not allowed to cross that river. Every day for weeks before the Melbourne Cup, I had the trainer or the owner or the minister in my ear about letting that horse into the state as an exception to the rule. And you can imagine the sorts of pressure that put on myself and my team and my colleagues. Fortunately, I had the backing of the executive director of the day and of the backing of the industry participants and stakeholders, and we kept that horse out. And that's challenging because the horse may well have been perfectly healthy. May well have been some other way we could have done it. But that's what the legal orders said. That's what the process was for us, and we didn't do it. That incident alone taught me an awful lot about pressure and handling pressure and ensuring that you did things right, that you had the support of those around you. It also built in, I believe, in me, a little bit of resilience that was useful later on. And that doesn't happen overnight. That's a matter of many battle scars adding up to that resilience. I'll come back to that. So that event, I think, was responsible for a bit of confidence in myself, but also confidence by those around me. And that led to me becoming the Director of Biosecurity Operations in Victoria. Diane, see your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, Lloyd, what did you do during that time to make it so that you could cope through that situation? Because obviously having support around you is important, but what did you do personally?
I'll answer it now. I was actually going to use that to talk about resilience as right at the end, but I'll do it now because it's quite relevant. And these are not things that I knew at the time. There was a lot of stress, as you can imagine, there. I think one of the things did, or we did, it wasn't me, but the team that I was working with did, was every day in that event, we did something a bit special. We did things like, we had a quote board at the back of the control centre for funny quotes that had happened. So the dirty brown ditch made it onto that quote board. There was a bunch of others. We made sure that as well as doing our job, we also had a little bit of fun, tried to have a little bit of fun in that response, highly stressful response every day through little things like that. We did things like ensuring that the control centre people all stayed at the same accommodation and had dinner together. So we ended up with that peer support around us. Now, these weren't things I did. These were just things that obviously wiser people than I had were at the time organised. But they left me with those sort of lessons. So for other responses, I tried to do the same thing. Sometimes it's not possible, but we try to do that. So that sort of stress management, that's having that support around you, is really useful. The other thing that I think is really important in terms of stress management is about being in control and knowing, doing what you can to control the situation, but also recognizing that there are some things you can't control and that you need to actually be accepting of those things you can't control. Nobody does this alone. So being in control means that you have to have that support that I talked about. And you only get that support through things like good communication, good relationships, trust in your team, all of the things that leadership is built around. I was very lucky to have good leaders around me and learn those sorts of lessons. The other things around stress management, as I said, is about finding that time to relax. When you step out of that stressful environment, don't carry it with you. That's easier said than done at times, but it's a technique that needs practice and you need to do. I should have mentioned earlier too that as well as my veterinary degree, I have a psychology degree. So that helped me a little bit in terms of those sorts of things. I talked about that fun times, having your team have fun together. That's also important for you personally when you're away from the stressful environment, to find those ways to relax and to leave that stress behind. The other thing I think is really important is recognition that mistakes can happen, that you can make mistakes. In fact, sometimes they're good things, but punishing yourself for making mistakes, and I've made plenty of them, it is not a good thing. Being honest about your mistakes, fronting up to them, wearing them and learning from them is really important. But punishing yourself for mistakes is just really poor and leads to greater stress and more or less resilience, in my view. And that applies to others as well, recognizing that mistakes can happen, others can make mistakes as well, and recognizing that those times for that mistakes are made are opportunities. And you don't punish mistakes for others, you help people learn. And you also understand that sometimes that the mistakes are not mistakes, but they're things that are out of your control. So that's a short answer, probably longish answer to your question, Anne. Nobody's perfect. Resilience is a really, really important part of leadership. And I think it's something that each and every one of us should practice from day one. You find ways that suit you to bounce back from those challenges, because we are in the job all of us here in the job, which present us with those challenges. I'll just go back to my timeline a bit. I was the director of, incident control for equine influenza, and I think because my team did so well, I got a bit of credit for that. So I ended up being seen as a future leader of Biosecurity Victoria. One thing led to another. I became the director of operations for Biosecurity Victoria, and a job I really enjoyed. Had a great team spread across the state, doing really good work, and expected to stay as director of Biosecurity Victoria for some time, until somebody who has a whole lot more authority than the executive director of Biosecurity Victoria stepped in and said, no, this is not the future for you. I want to go and live in Tasmania. So my wife bundled us up and took us to Tasmania. And it's at the time I was a bit, I don't really know. It just so happened that the job of the general manager of Biosecurity Tasmania came up while we were considering all of this. So I thought, I'll throw my hat in the ring. There was still a bit of argy-bargy between my wife and I about whether or not it's time to move to Tasmania. Anyway, I got the job. I was offered the job. And I decided, well, why not? I'll make the jump. And so we moved to Tasmania for personal reasons more than my career reasons, even though it was a step up in my career to become the general manager of Biosecurity Tasmania. I took it on. With that trepidation of imposter syndrome. I thought, what am I doing stepping into this role as general manager of Biosecurity Tasmania? I'm a vet who happened to fall my way up into a role in Queensland DPI. How did I end up in this position, answering almost directly to a minister, leading a team of highly professional people, trying to look after a state's biosecurity system? How did I end up here? What an imposter. 9 years later, I still felt a little bit like an imposter. But I think I could look back and say, you know what a great decision. I live in one of the most magnificent places. In fact, what you see in my background is my view every day. Not always as clear as that, but it's a beautiful place to live. So I was very lucky in terms of that decision. I was also very lucky in terms of the job I got. Again, highly stressful job, very challenging, had lots of ups and downs, lots of bumps along the way. But I'm proud of what I've done, and that's important. I think that's important, to be proud of what you do. I learned an awful lot from everybody around me, from the humble biosecurity officer to the branch managers, the CVO, the Chief Plant Protection Officer. I learned a lot from those people, and deem it a privilege to have been supported by those people. And I've used that word, people, because that's the point I want to make here, is that none of us are leaders without people. None of us are leaders without good teams around us. And I was blessed with some really good people to work with over that time. I was also challenged by some people who I didn't think were as good as those others. And that's a challenge of leadership as well. My point is, it's about people. And pretty much everything we do is about people. Why do we do the job we do? Our job isn't about, largely, let's put animal welfare aside and a couple of those other areas, but largely what we do is about making our community a better community, protecting the livelihood of our producers, protecting our environmental assets. All of these things are largely about people, about our community, and so that aspect of leadership is a really critical and important, is to understand that this is about people. You don't achieve anything without the support of the people around you. What you do is for the people, and if you want to be a leader, those skills are really important skills in my view. I've got a number of, I had a couple of anecdotes listed for around my time in GMBT as well, but I might limit it to just one. So equine influenza was a really major event that I was involved in. I was also involved in, I was a state controller for the 2010 locust response. As I said, a number of other emergency events. I was state controller for the Black Saturday bushfires in Victoria. And that was a very stressful and challenging time. In Tasmania, I was the general manager, or the equivalent of the executive director of biosecurity, for the 2018 Queensland fruit fly outbreak, which was at the time Tasmania's biggest and most complex biosecurity response. I see Ray here somewhere. I don't know if that's still the case, Ray, whether it's still the biggest, but it was at the time. And again, it was really challenging, a very difficult time, particularly in a state that wasn't used to these sorts of responses at this scale. One of the most challenging responses I've been involved in. Less so about the pest than more about the people, the interference, the political interference, the interference by non-biosecurity people in the response. And as the general manager, you're in the middle of that, you're in the crux of that, trying to protect the response from all of this rubbish that was coming from the minister's office, or in this case, a deputy secretary's office, trying to protect the response and get the job done when you've got all this stuff coming. And so I lent on those skills that I had developed previously, that resilience, that stress relief, the communication, that clear communication that's needed to get myself through myself and my team through that time. We made mistakes. I made mistakes. I think we learned from them. And in the end, we got the job done and got that cleared out Queensland fruit fly from Tasmania and reopened the trade, international and domestic trade again. So it was a successful response in the end, but it was challenging. It was difficult.
Lloyd, do you mind if I ask you another question?
Sure.
I was just wondering, so earlier on you were talking about how important relationships are in building trust and those sorts of things. How did you go about it when you were running a response like that? And it sounds like you've had experience not just in biosecurity, but others as well, when you're dealing with people that, in the community that are affected, that perhaps you don't know, you haven't had a chance to build those relationships and that trust with. How did you go about that?
You've read my notes, haven't you? So this for me, this was about another really important aspect of leadership, in my view, and that's values. About being true to your values, and so building trust and building relationships. I think it's all about values. It's about honesty. It's about open communication and being honest and not pretending. And I've seen this happen too many times where politicians do it all the time. I don't answer any ministers now, so answer to any ministers now, so I can say this. Sometimes trying to spin something just, I think, leads down the wrong path and actually creates more problems than it helps. As a leader, you should be honest. If you make a mistake, be honest about it. If you think something, be honest about it. Sometimes you have to retract what you think and say, well, you know what, I was wrong, but at least be honest about it up front. I think honesty is a really critical and undervalued value. But the other values are important too. Respect. Everybody deserves respect. Even that guy phoning me up every day, abusing me about not letting his horse across the border, deserves respect. The bad, and the sad of animal welfare. Those people deserve respect still and need to be treated with respect, despite what they're doing. And sometimes that's really challenging when you've got that a-hole that you're trying to prosecute. Even they deserve respect. And I think if you can build those sort of values into the way you operate with people, it's even more important when it comes to your trusted relationships, the people around you. Trust is very easy to lose and very difficult to build, and certainly very difficult to rebuild. And so, in my view, that applies to everything. I think it worked for me, even with those ministers that I've been challenged by, particularly in Tasmania. I was less in contact with ministers in Victoria, but in Tasmania, I spent a lot of time in ministers' offices, talking to ministers. Tasmania is the sort of community where everybody has access to the minister, and so I spent a lot of time talking to ministers, and in that what's the saying? Forgotten it now, but the frank and fearless conversations. I don't think I wasn't afraid to have those, and occasionally the minister would not be happy with me. That's the fearless bit, but you have to have them, and it's the same with your staff. Sometimes you have to have them. If you don't, then you're being dishonest, and to me that's part of the importance of building relationships, is being honest, being open, being open and listening to those other viewpoints. So if a minister or a staff member said, you know what, you're wrong, then examine that and see and understand whether they've got a good point. And if you're wrong, admitting it and changing your view. I remember in one of my leadership meetings where I had all of the branch managers of Biosecurity Tasmania around the table, and I made a point. I think I made it fairly strongly, and one of the staff members said, "No, but what about this?" And we had a bit of discussion. I said, "Oh, well, you know what? I think I was wrong." In my head, I said that. I said, "Okay, we'll change my mind. We'll go that way instead." And one of the branch managers stood up and said, "Well, you just change your mind all the time. Why don't you make a decision and stick to it?" Fortunately, I built the trust of most in the room, and a couple of them sort of stood up and said, "No, Lloyd just heard our argument and acknowledged that our argument was strong, and therefore it's a good thing that he changed his mind." Now, whether I was wrong or right on the day, that's not the point. The point is about having that trust and having the openness, not being dogmatic about anything, understanding that, you know what, flexible thoughts are strength, not a weakness. And so all of those things are about good communication, good relationships, trust. So that's a very long answer to your question, Anne, but it was also half of what I was going to talk about in my sum up.
Thanks, Lloyd.
So I might just go to the other bits of my sum up about other lessons that I learned, and these are a little bit more prosaic. One of the things I learned about through my emergency management experience is the importance of preparedness. And we use preparedness in different, that word in lots of different ways in biosecurity. But I use it more generally for everything that we do. If you go into a meeting with somebody, be it a minister or a staff member, to discuss something, be prepared. I've been to way too many meetings where you wander in, and there's a rambling conversation, and obviously people aren't prepared. As chair or as participants, there's lack of preparation. Nothing is more disheartening in my view. And so whatever you're doing as a leader, be prepared. Be prepared for the conversation. Be prepared for the event. I think that's a really important lesson I learned through emergency management. And being prepared is about understanding what you're doing, working through the various conversations or points that might be raised, and expect the unexpected. Think about it, but expect the unexpected. Another thing I learned through emergency management was about systems and processes. I've worked in and with organisations that have different approaches, and I think that too often in biosecurity in particular, we rely on the knowledge and experience of people like me that have been there for too long, and the world is changing. Systems and processes underpin what we do, and they need to be top-notch, but they also need to be there. And so those systems and processes should be lent on, and you soon notice that they're not very good if you lose the corporate knowledge or the personalities, the people that bring that experience. I talked about communication and relationships. I think that they're critical. And I talked about resilience. So that's effectively the things I wanted to talk about, Anne. And for whatever time we've got left, I'm happy to talk about anything that anybody would like to talk about.
It's fantastic, Lloyd. Thank you so much. And I will open it up to our participants to ask a question of you. I'm just wanting to reflect on the chat, Lloyd. So Megan has put in a couple of points, and they're just points, they're comments. The first one is, fail your way forward. Mistakes are a part of personal and professional growth. And then Megan has also said, Lloyd, you nailed the 5 domains of post-traumatic growth when talking about resilience development. Love hearing about it presented this way, particularly around veterinary issues. 30% of Australian vets suffer from high stress, a quarter from depression, and they have 4 times the national death by suicide rate. This is a great and useful tool. So thanks for the comments, Megan. I don't know if you'd like to add anything to that.
I've actually got the flu, and I've got a very deep and sexy voice, and my nose is dripping, so I won't talk.
Thank you, though. Thanks for I've got a really nice vision of you right now.
Was that it?
No, I just was saying to Megan, I've got a very nice picture in my mind of what she's looking like right now.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Megan. I'm very conscious of those sort of statistics you just talked about. I actually lost a good friend, veterinary friend, colleague, to suicide. Sorry, I'm just getting emotional even thinking about it now. It's a really challenging profession, but so is what we do in biosecurity. particularly when it comes to biosecurity emergencies. What we do has a huge impact on people, in shutting a business down, eradicating, destroying their property. They're massive impacts, and they're highly stressful on the people and on us. So that building of resilience, looking after ourselves, is really important.
Fabulous. Thanks, Lloyd. I see Nathan Rhodes has got his hand up. Nathan?
Thanks, Anne. Thanks, Lloyd. Really appreciate the chat, and reflected on some of my own similar experiences in emergency response, and the resilience that you need to, employ and demonstrate in the midst of a response. They're obviously often fast-paced, high-pressure, stressful environments, and you have to do certain things just to get through. But then one of the things that I found really hard is when that's all over and you go back to normal, there's a different set of skills that you need to apply, a different set of coping mechanisms that you need. Can you reflect on the sorts of things that you used when suddenly that pressure and busyness and relevance is now gone?
Yeah, I think I'd argue that emergency management's just business as usual on steroids. That the same techniques you use for dealing with that high intense stress in emergencies are techniques you can use in your business as usual days as well. Sometimes it's the change in pace, which is the stress itself. You get used to that frenetic time in a biosecurity, in an emergency, and then you go back to your business as usual. And as busy as that is, it's not the same sort of intensity. Sometimes that itself creates a stress. And I think that it's about recognition of that and trying to get back into the routine. I think routine's another good way to manage stress, be it in an emergency or in your day-to-day operations. Having a good routine, making sure that you have, for other reasons, it's important as well. But regular meetings, regular leadership meetings with your team, regular ways of doing things, your time management skills, the way you manage your work day to day, having those good sort of time management skills. That sort of regularity helps manage stress. And it comes back to what I said before about being in control. One of the greatest, in my view, greatest causes of stress is that feeling of lack of control of your life. And if you're in control, then it's less stressful. And so we're building those routines, building those structures in the way you do things, and practicing them. I think that's how I managed it, ensuring that, and biosecurity is the sort of field where it doesn't matter how well you plan, something will come at you from left field and disrupt your routines. But having them there at least to lean on, that's how I did it, Nathan.
Thanks, Lloyd. Appreciate it.
Excellent, Nathan. Thanks, Lloyd. In the chat, Lloyd, we've got Sean Holden has said, love the exploration of making mistakes, and in particular, the notion that it is a strength to be flexible in decision making and it is okay to change one's mind. And then Adam Reading has a question for you. He's asked, what strategies or methods do you use to prepare for meetings as a leader?
So the first thing I do is understand and write down, because I think writing things down helps me. Everybody's different here. But for me, writing things down helps clarify in my mind what I'm thinking. And so understanding what the purpose of the meeting is. Why are we having this meeting? Sometimes it's because, as I said before, we have to have a regular meeting, and it's good to have a regular meeting just simply to give people a chance to talk. But every meeting should have a purpose. What is that purpose? Understand it. And then to work out, okay, depending on whether I'm the chair or whether I'm a participant, what do I want to get out of this meeting? And actually try and articulate that myself as well. And then look at the pros and cons, probably the wrong word, the fors and against those sorts of things, and write them down and go through that process of thinking through what it is you're trying to achieve, thinking through what others might be thinking, and where you might be challenged or how you might challenge. Doing that sort of thinking up front, rather than just oh, hang on, we've got a meeting about biosecurity exercises coming up. I'll just wander in there and wing it. And I've had to do that plenty of times, of course, because of the pressures you're under. But that process of actually sitting down, taking that half hour, sitting down and thinking through what this meeting's about, what we want to get out of it, you know, what are the likely, where the likely conversations might go, and the fors and against all of that, and writing it down. For me, writing it down was a critical thing. Even for this discussion, I have my notebook where I've just simply gone through and dot pointed stuff, knowing that I was going to have just a conversation. But then just that process of thinking through it helps me a lot.
Fabulous. Thanks, Lloyd. I see that Chantel has her hand raised.
Thanks, Anne. Lloyd, you spoke about the importance of having regular meetings with your team. Are there any other approaches that you take to managing teams?
Oh yes, yeah. Many. Meetings are just one tool. You know, there's so many ways that you, and they're personal relationships you're managing. The managing a team sounds, you know, I've got this team, I manage it. No, nonsense. The team's made up of people, and it's about building those relationships with people, and all of those things I said about, you know, the honesty and the values and whatever. That's what it's about. So I'd go and have a cup of tea with a person, if you can see them under stress, make sure that you touch base with them. Are they okay? You know, just talk to them. You know, have a regular morning tea for the group that are around you. Might not necessarily be your team, but yeah, all of those things about building good relationships are managing a team. So there's 100 techniques. You know, from a simple wander in to their office in the morning. Come on, hey John, how are things? You know, to let's go out to lunch and or let's catch up after dinner, after work, and have a beer. You know, all of those things are about managing a team, and they don't need to be constructed. They don't need to be formal meetings. They're about. And I've heard it said that you can't be a manager and a friend. Nonsense. You can be, as long as you understand where the boundaries are, and you both understand where the boundaries are, and you've adhered to those values that I talked about earlier on. You can have. I consider lots and lots of people I have worked with over the years as friends. Some of them are enduring friendships that I still have. Some of them, when the role finished, I no longer have those friendships in my life. But I think you can be friends in a broad definition as well as a manager.
I agree, and it sounds like you'd be a pleasure to work with, Lloyd.
Thanks, Chantel.
Thanks, Chantel, and thanks, Lloyd. Amy Hogan has her hand up.
Yes, I do. Lloyd, I think it really leads on from Chantel's question too, you know, balancing that relationship with teams. You mentioned before about having hard conversation with teams. Just wondering if you could share your observations if managers aren't willing to do that.
About having private conversations?
Having hard conversations.
Oh, hard conversations. Oh, look, that's the most difficult part of a manager. Is having those hard conversations, and I've had some very difficult ones. I've had to. I had to. Yeah, I think I can talk about this one. One of the. This is in Victoria when I was director of operations. One of our staff members was using their job for personal gain in a criminal way. And we had to go through a whole process of sacking that person. So that's one extreme. That was really, really tough. Even tougher than that, because that one was, you had the law on your side. Even tougher than that was a staff member in Tasmania who just wasn't up to the job. Also had some dubious behavioural characteristics. Lowest possible rank in the organisation, and I was the general manager. So you would normally, as a general manager, leave that to the branch manager or the section leader or whatever to have those conversations. But this had gone on and on and on and on, and it escalated. So I had to have those conversations with that person. And it's really tough. It's a really difficult thing to do. So I won't talk about the actual events or where they come. I'll talk about personal stuff, like the personal aspects of that. And it goes back to what I was saying before about trust and relationships. Even with that person, it's about building the trust in an honest way. So I wasn't going to wander into either of those cases and say, you know what, this is pretty tough. You know, you're being hard done by. However, we've got to do this. The process does that. That's just dishonest. So you've got to go in and say, you did the wrong thing, mate. Sorry. I understand this is really challenging for you. And so again, you're being honest, but at the same time, you're not being deceptive. You're not undermining, or you're sticking to your values, in an honest way. And 99% of people appreciate that, even if they're, I'm going to lose my job, but at least this bloke's talking to me. At least he's honest with me. And I think that's the critical thing. That also helps ease the stress on yourself personally, in my view, or at least it did for me. So I could go in there and I could think, I've got a job to do. It's impacting on this person's life, and but I can't compromise, because by compromising, I'm being unfair to other staff, I'm being unfair to the organisation, I'm being unfair to my community. So I can't compromise, but I can still be honest, and I can still be sympathetic. I can still treat that person with respect. So I think they're the sort of lessons that I learned over time.
That's great. Thank you, Lloyd.
Yeah, great, Lloyd. Thank you so much. That's amazing. I see that Bianca has made a comment in the chat just saying, thank you for sharing, Lloyd. A very informative talk. It is great to hear from your perspective. The people-centric way in which you have operated over the years have been explained so well. It is very valuable to listen to a successful leader with human-centred winning attitude. Many thanks. And Adam also thanks you for the response to his question as well. Now, I don't see any other hands raised, and there's no other questions in the chat, so I am going to ask Amy to put the survey in the chat box for those of you that have been here today. If you could, if you've got a minute to fill out the survey before we end the session, that would be invaluable for us, because it does help us to make sure that we're tailoring to your needs and interests, and that we get speakers that are of value to you into the future. And on that note, I'm going to say thank you so much, Lloyd, for joining us. It has been such a pleasure to work with you on this, and to have you to listen to your reflections after a very long career. I'm particularly interested in the people approach that you've used, and it's been just so fascinating and fabulous to have you. So thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome. And best of luck at all of you on your leadership journey.
Thanks so much, Lloyd, and thank you, everyone. Have a fabulous weekend. It's so great to see you. Our next speaker, as I mentioned earlier, is Christina Matthews next Thursday morning for a breakfast with Christina Matthews. So I look forward to seeing you all online then. Thanks so much.